those who are able to join us today at the CTRI Enrichment lectures and panel co-hosted with a special interest group on global health. We are very honored to have a very distinctive panel of speakers today, and we are open to the very interactive format of that session. The session is about a global problem, but also allowing us to take a lens and look at the lens of that global program presence in the United States. So I'm hoping you look at it both from the lens of the global health, but also highlights the connectivity of our agenda with the global health agenda. We are very fortunate at Global Health SIG to have 3 panelists. I will introduce them briefly today. I don't want to take time from them presenting you the very interesting talk, but also engaging with you in a very interactive discussion. So let me welcome to our panel today, Karen McDonnell. She's Associate Professor at Department of Prevention Foundation, Milken Institute of Public Health at George Washington University. Welcome, Karen, and thank you for joining us. I also am welcoming Angela Peabody. She's Executive Director and Founder of Global Woman P.E.A.C.E Foundation. Welcome, Angela. And it is my great pleasure also to welcome Khadija Abdullah, who works with us in HIV prevention and treatment program at Children's as a Senior Clinical Research Coordinator, but she's also founder and Executive Director of RAHMA, Reaching All HIV Positive Muslims in America. So really a very exciting panel with very different representation, and I hope you enjoy the presentation and engage in a discussion with us. Passing now the word to you, Karen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And we're going to talk about the unknown pandemic of female genital mutilation and cutting. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our informational session on an unknown pandemic. And I'll be referring to this as FGMC rather than saying female genital mutilation and cutting throughout. And our goal here is to mobilize with communities to end FGMC through dialogue, community collaboration, advocacy, and training. FGMC is a reality for many women and girls across different communities around the world. And yes, in the US, and yes, in the DMV. It remains a hidden practice, often done by women to women, and girls are raised to believe that they must remain silent about what they underwent. Silence, though, is an endemic or inherent part of this type of gender violence that can lead to lifelong physical, sexual, and emotional consequences. At the core of providing better prevention, protection, health, and social support services for women and girls is, of course, stronger data, enhanced research, and community engagement, just like we're doing today. Health professionals such as yourselves may have various encounters with survivors throughout your career. And when you are equipped with the right knowledge and training, you're going to have the ability to provide survivors with an optimal experience by delivering appropriate resources and high-level care. So today what we're going to do is we're going to explore FGMC in the US, globally, and in the DMV, discuss some resources that are available to you and other frontline professionals, and then looking at how to better understand how to provide trauma-informed care while also practicing cultural competence and sensitivities. So without further ado, we'll get started. As you saw, here we are, myself, Angela Peabody, and Khadija Abdullah. And our agenda, first we're going to go through the ABCs of FGMC, and then we're going to talk about the toolkit and client care, provide some next steps, and engage in a Q&A. But please, as we go through, please list your questions as we go through. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague and collaborator, Angela Peabody.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I suppose. To begin this section, as Karen mentioned, we will involve the what, who, where, and when of FGMC. But before we dive into it any further, we want to hear from you in this poll question. How many of you have cared for someone who has experienced female genital mutilation or cutting? Please write your question, your answers in the chat.
Okay. Looks like we have a bunch that maybe have cared for somebody, Angela.
Good. So thank you for answering the previous question. To ensure we all are on the same page, I'm going to share the World Health Organization definition of female genital mutilation and cutting. FGMC comprises of procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons, no medical reason at all, it's done. It is recognized internationally as a human rights violation, torture, and an extreme form of violence against women and girls. And it is usually performed between birth and puberty. Throughout this presentation, as Karen mentioned, we will be referring to the practice as FGMC. But it is important to note that there are many different terms for it. These can include just FGM or female circumcision, Khatna, as they refer to it in the Bora community in India, Bando, which is referred to it in countries in West Africa, Suna, and many other terms, but they are all referring to the same thing, which is FGMC. So you might want to be cognizant of how the patient or someone from her community refers to it. Whatever she calls it, go with her terminology to make her more comfortable. Let's look at the types. The WHO, World Health Organization, outlines 4 major categories of FGMC. In general, each of these categories are very broad. Let's look at type 1. Now, the type that they are on the chart, you'll see there what it looks like when no FGMC has been done. But let's start with type 1, which is the second image. It's, as referred to it, clitoridectomy is the removal of the clitoral hood with or without removal of part or all of the clitoris. That's type 1. Type 2, referred to as the excision, is the partial or total removal of the clitoris and the labia minora, with or without excision of the labia majora. And then type 3, referred to as infibulation, is the narrowing of the vaginal orifice with creation of a covering seal by cutting and repositioning the labia minora and or the labia majora, with or without excision of the clitoris. And you see that type 3 where it's stitched up. Type 4 is referred to as other, including pricking, piercing, cauterizing, scraping, etc. The categories range from the least severe, which is type 1, to the most severe, which is type 3, with type 4 being an other category. Because FGMC is not standardized medical practice, these are just broad categories for types of FGMC. The severity and trauma related to the cut varies greatly between those who undergo it. Now, the title of this talk is Unknown, as Karen said, Unknown Pandemic. What makes something a pandemic? We are all now familiar with a pandemic and what it is. It's typically conceived as a disease or illness that is prevalent over a whole country or the world. Well, I would argue that FGMC is indeed a pandemic. It exists on all the continents except Antarctica. It is present in at least 92 countries, and there are currently 200 or more million women and girls living with the effects of FGMC in the world. However, I'm sharing this statistic with some caution that it most likely is underrepresentation of the true figure of women and girls impacted by FGMC. Yes, I was just going to say, looking at the map, you see where category 1, category 2, category 3, and category 4, when you look at the prevalence in the world. We want to share Comfort's video to help highlight some of the consequences of FGMC, but also because Comfort's story highlights another form of genital modification. And technically, the World Health Organization does not include in the current 4 types of FGMC, and that is labia elongation. That's what Comfort went through. However, as Comfort mentions, it is important to name these harms that do occur to women. Therefore, we are showing her video here.
For so long, I kept a painful secret. I can still feel that freezing cold water that ran from the mountains down to the floor of the thick forest. For 6 weeks, 10 of us girls sat in that water every morning. A black herbal mixture was continually applied to one of the most sensitive parts of my body. These herbs were meant to ease the pain as the elderly women pulled my labia minora. Each time they applied the substance, I burned. My nanny encouraged me to continue the process. My future marriage depended on it. She reminded me each morning, men prefer matinji to be the length of the middle finger. I kept at it, but each week the burning increased. I have not heard other women from Zimbabwe talk about being in pain from this, but surely I can't be the only one. At the time, I did not realize that this process would cause me a lifetime of excruciating pain and recurring infections. Only after 16 years, as a result of the complications from giving birth to my son, did I finally connect the dots with what happened to me as a child. I sought help. I looked for a therapist. Most could not understand. Even those aware of female genital mutilation were not familiar with what had happened to me. They didn't know it takes different forms, and that in my case, it's a type 4. Since they couldn't identify it, they did not want to deal with it or with me, so I kept quiet. I suffered in silence until the day my friend told me about a surgery that could ease my pain. I am healing, But I wonder how many young women from my part of the world have endured this scarring. How many faced complications during childbirth? How many are dying? Before we can stop it, we need to acknowledge it. We need to talk about the harm it causes. We need to name it.
Now let's look at this chart. The most prevalent age range for FGMC to occur is 15 years and older. From this chart, you can see that FGMC can be performed as early as infancy. The second highest age range is 10 to 14 years old. Let's look at here are some key themes we would like for you to keep in mind when it comes to working with survivors of FGMC in general.
Actually, before we do that, Khadija, do you want to talk about some of the numbers?
Sure. Thank you, Angela and Dr. McDonnell. So Angela mentioned a couple of these numbers when she was speaking a little bit earlier. So we have some numbers here on this slide, and I would love for people who are viewing this presentation to kind of guess what these numbers mean. So let's start with 200 million. Does anyone know what that means in regards to FGM/C? Feel free to write it in the chat or mute your mic and take a guess. There is all love here, so feel free to take a guess and share. Okay, Garnett. Okay, yeah, so 200 million women and girls have had FGM around the world. And well, actually, I'm gonna wait to give answers, but thank you for that response. And let's think about 3 million. Does anyone know what that means? Or what it stands for? Okay, died from it. Okay, thank you, Dr. Juanina. And the next number is 500,000 or 500,000 plus. Do we know what that refers to? Complications, okay, thank you. And then 40. Anyone else will give it a try? Okay, countries banned it. And the last one is 0. Do you know what that means? So let's go ahead and see what these numbers mean. So 200 million is, as Garnett had mentioned, women and girls who have had FGMC done to them. 300 million are number of girls who have it happen to them this year. So it's still happening, and 300 million girls are at risk of having it done this year. And then 500,000 are those who had it right here in the US. So people might think sometimes it happens in other countries, but it happens also right here in the United States of America. And also here in the US, we have 40 states with laws against FGM/C. And then hopefully the goal is by 2030 that no girl has to undergo FGM/C. Thank you to those who answered and took a guess. Much appreciated. So these mentioned about 500,000 girls are at risk of FGM/C in the US. So either they were performed on them or at risk. And we might have heard things in the news a couple years ago of girls having it completed or done in Michigan, for example. We have people we've met that have had it done, at home or in different communities. So it does happen right here, even though it's not legal. And then we can see here, we have different shaded states on this map, and the colors can tell you how many are at risk in those certain areas. And actually right here in the DMV, about 50K-ish are at risk for FGM/C. Next, please. So here are some of the health impacts of FGM/C. So short term, you might have severe pain, a lot of bleeding, you might have issues with peeing or urination, might go into shock, you might have infections, swelling of your genital tissues, and even death. And then for long term, you might have OBG complications, lack of pleasure during sex. You move the clitoris, that's very important to feel pleasure. And if you don't have that, you might not feel it during sex, or sometimes, like you mentioned, the 4 types, you're completely sewn up. So it's hard to have sex. Again, you might have issues with your periods. You might have mental health concerns, might have UTIs, infertility, and chronic infections. So, this topic can be very taboo to talk about it, but if we talk about it, we can change what's happening to our women and girls. And here's a little quote from a survivor who remembers, getting night terrors all the time. She woke up in the middle of the night just screaming, just having these memories of undergoing this procedure, this mutilation, this cutting, and it's just really disturbing for the survivor. Next slide, please. So we're gonna go ahead and watch a short video of a survivor right here in the US who undergone FGM/C.
I was born in 1944 to a loving Midwestern American farm family. We were close to the earth and our animals. When I was 3, my mother became concerned that my face turned red when I touched my clitoris. She brought me to a doctor, and the doctor cut me. My mother said, "Don't ever talk about this." I was alone with my questions as a child, teenager, and young adult. I did not discuss nerve damage discomfort, even with my sisters. When I gave birth to my first child, I did not talk about the complications I faced. I wanted a natural labor, but the doctor didn't know what to do. He put me under to perform an extensive episiotomy. I awoke 4 hours after my daughter was born, and it took my body months to heal. I told a couple from my church about what had happened to me as a child. They said, "Don't ever tell that story again." Later, I shared with women at work who said, "Don't repeat that or you'll ruin your career." But is this really my shame? What about other women having their babies with doctors who don't know what to do? I could not stay silent, and I started reaching out to new people. My Somali friend Filsan Ali and I produced a bilingual brochure for infibulated Somali women to give to their doctors to make safe labor and delivery plans. I went public internationally, and my close friends and family supported me. Creating art and connecting with nature has helped me heal. I've learned to spin wool and weave on a loom. I have found peace in flower gardens, weeding, deadheading, and making bouquets. Today, I live where eagles soar and deer feed by a river. I hope my story will help people be aware that girls have been cut in cultures throughout the world.
So why is this happening? Why are people justifying FGM/C? So some of the reasons listed here are to control sexuality, to make women more marriageable, so the men can know for sure she's a virgin, nothing happened with her because she's all sewn up. It's part of tradition or culture. It makes you clean, religion, and others. So these are some of the many factors people use to justify this practice. And now I'll turn it over to Karen to talk to us more about legislation in the United States in regards to FGM/C.
Thanks, Khadija. One of the questions that we're asked all the time is, how can this be legal? And it isn't in the United States. And actually in 1996, there was a criminalization act for FGMC that was enacted as part of Congress. And that remained in effect until it was challenged in 2017. And in that time, you may have heard Khadija mention that girls were not only being cut in the US, but they were being taken from the US to maybe their parental home country where they were cut off of US soil and then brought back. And in 2017, that act was challenged and it was found to be unconstitutional. And that was upheld when a district court decision in 2018 struck down that federal law that had been in effect from 1996 until 2018. But we did not let that deter us. As members of this team, as you can see here, we actually helped to convince Congress and the Senate to enact the Stop FGM Act of 2020, also known as HR 6100, that helped to stop the holes that had existed in the previous legislation, but also add attention to prevention efforts and public health efforts to stop FGM in the US. And so one of the things we found by having that federal law in 1996 be challenged, we found that it really is important that states have a safety net to having, in case the federal law doesn't capture things like interstate commerce. So it's really important that states do enact laws against FGM. And that's another thing that people such as Angela Peabody on this call have really devoted their lives to doing. And as you see here, Maryland does have a law, as well as Virginia. Virginia's goes a little bit farther than Maryland's and has funds, a call, I should say, to have it brought into the sexual education in schools. DC, we are working currently to get that law enacted so that there's an FGM specific law as well. As you can see, we still have a number of states that don't have FGM specific laws, and we need your help to get those passed. And one of those things that we need to do is to really make sure those common misconceptions are corrected. FGMC does not have a basis in religion. Some people incorrectly think that it only happens in Muslim communities. And as we've demonstrated with Renee's story, that's just not the fact. And actually, FGM predates any organized religion. It doesn't only happen in Africa. We know that it happens on every continent except for Antarctica. We have documentation of it happening in over 92 countries. So people can't say it just doesn't happen here. It does. And that's why it's so important that we all know about what is happening, because it has been shrouded in secrecy and shame and stigma for far too long. Which is why this group came together to create a toolkit for a number of different audiences to create awareness so that we can start enacting change. So, Khadija, do you want to introduce the toolkit?
Sure. So we worked on the toolkit, Dr. McDonnell, Karen, and several other wonderful people to try to understand FGMC here in the US. So we interviewed women who undergone FGM/C to understand, their experiences with the healthcare providers, what they have encountered, what they wish to see from providers to have a better experience getting treatment and care, and stigma they might have faced. And we also interviewed healthcare providers too to see what they learned about FGM/C and their experiences. And many of them have said they didn't learn about it in medical school, didn't have any classes on it. And a lot of times they just, came into caring for people by chance for service, and they didn't know how to respond. And some of the women have mentioned that when they got care from the providers, that they felt like they felt stigmatized, providers didn't know how to respond, and even it brought in students that would sometimes just stare at them and not know what to do when it came to their care. So this toolkit, we hope you guys can go online and look at it. We don't have a lot of time to go through every page today, but if you go online, you'll see all the interviews, information, toolkits, brochures you can download, pictures, some videos that you can utilize it as you navigate caring for women who undergo FGM/C here in the US. And the toolkit has been posted here in the chat by Annie. Thank you so much. And it was funded by the Department of Health and Human Services on Women's Health. And we are so thankful to all the women, health providers, and experts who give their voices and experiences.
So one of the questions we want you all to be thinking about is, what role do health practitioners play in supporting survivors and those impacted by FGMC? So we want you to think about that as we go through and talk about the toolkit. And just so you know that this was, as Khadija had mentioned, we went through and we interviewed survivors and healthcare providers. So this is an evidence-based toolkit that we provide up-to-date and evidence-based content. We provide you with fact sheets with general information. We have screening forms that are available to you. We have a diverse content, and including videos and podcasts, case studies and survivor studies, and we also have a list of DC resources that you can familiarize yourself with, as well as provide to others in your world. Like I said, this is an evidence-based toolkit, and as you can see, we have hyperlinks to different articles that you can see where all of our references are from. So one of the things we want you to be sure of when working with survivors and families who have experience with FGMC is we want you to be knowledgeable. Okay, we want you to learn better ways to support your patient families. We want you to use the toolkit so that you're prepared before you interact with families that have experience with FGMC. We want you to change your practice. So make sure that you're offering the best service possible, because language matters, and how you communicate with survivors in your care really matters. And as you can see on the toolkit, we've provided opportunities for you to understand, based on what we have learned from working with survivors, the do's and the don'ts. And as Angela mentioned previously, make sure to understand the words that your patient or client uses to describe her experience with FGMC. We might call it, in research, FGMC, female genital mutilation and cutting, but the word mutilation is not necessarily one that you would use with your patient and client. As you can see, that word mutilation does convey a different type of meaning than the word cutting. Just as we talk about with other forms of gender violence, be careful about the tone that you use when discussing FGMC. Make sure it's non-judgmental. We also would say be careful when working with family members as interpreters, because family members may not be interpreting what you're saying in the manner that you may have intended. I just want to take a moment while we're here, and I'll show you the toolkit. Can you all see the toolkit here? We have toolkits for survivors, which you can provide to your clients about going through what is FGMC, how does it affect my health? So it's written from the perspective of the survivor. For the healthcare provider, you can see here that we have supplied, again, information sheets about what is FGMC, why should I screen for it? Okay, so I could click here and you can see that there are screening tools that we have provided for you, as well as knowing about the physical health effects. How do I discuss? You see our do's and don'ts here. We've also provided first-person stories, so you can understand what survivors have gone through. And if you find that your patient is pregnant, what are some things that you need to be cognizant of? And one in particular is, what are the mental health effects of FGMC? This is very important for healthcare providers to understand, that this is a form of trauma and therefore can have short and long-term effects that aren't just physical, as well as what you can do in your clinic to better serve the patients. And we go through a list here, and we have created a workbook that you can then create a better clinic atmosphere for your patients and clients. So I want to turn this over. So a member of our team here, Angela, has actually run one of the only support groups for FGMC survivors. And I really want you to listen to some of the words of advice that she has to offer us in working with survivors of FGMC. Angela?
Thank you, Karen. And it's good to be back, everyone. Here are some of the key themes we would like for you to keep in mind when it comes to working with survivors of FGMC in general. First, respect. All actions you take are guided by respect for the survivor's choices, wishes, rights, and dignity. We have to keep that in mind. Her safety. The safety of the survivor is our number one priority. Confidentiality. People have the right to choose to whom they will or will not tell their story. Maintaining confidentiality means not sharing any information to anyone. In our support group, we purposely do not record our sessions for that reason. And we charge each survivor that attends the support group or that is a member to make sure that she observes confidentiality with whatever she hears in the support group or witnesses. Non-discrimination, providing equal and fair treatment to anyone in need of support. No discrimination at all. And information and knowledge, if resources exist, always provide information on what is available. Share what you know and be transparent about what you do not know. Let the survivor decide if she wants to access health care. So we invite you to join in the next steps, we invite you to join our integrated community care and come together and work with us to help us end this practice of FGMC. Since 2014, we have been holding the Walk to End FGM on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. to help raise awareness. And over the years, it just became more popular and became an international event because people started joining us from all over the globe. Please join us this October 14th for our Global Woman Awards. We have been giving out awards and recognizing women, men, and students who dedicate their time to helping end FGMC. So we give them awards on the day before, and it's a collaboration with George Washington University. We give out awards on the day before the Walk to End FGM. So we hope that you will make plans to join us and save the dates, October 14th and October 15th this year. I'm proud to be presenting alongside of two of the Global Woman Award recipients in previous years. Both Karen and Khadija have received the Global Woman Award in previous years. So we hope you will join us. Thank you.
And so that is what we have for our presentation. We open it up to questions and that people might have. And we also invite you to visit the toolkit. We are always trying to make sure we have the most up-to-date information. And we have included our contact information here as well. So with that, I will stop sharing and open it up to any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Karen, Angela, and Khadija very much. And I do have a couple of comments and questions. So I really am thrilled with the work you've done and the tremendous amount of advocacy. I don't think we as a pediatric providers frequently think about this, but women come to us many times in postpartum period for the well check. And while we kind of assume this issue has been addressed with a OBGYN, your conversation, your presentation today made me think that that may be not always a niche that they would feel very comfortable. And we also see very large proportion, and I know this number is growing across US cities, of African immigrant women who many times come with very limited antenatal care in the United States. So I think it puts on us responsibility as a pediatric providers interacting with women, not only through early perinatal period, which obviously is the most fragile one, but throughout the overall interactions, pediatricians' responsibility to screen and address this issue in a more systematic way. I don't think we've done a good job, in all honesty, thinking about that. I will share with you the story. I put it in a chat box in the HIV program here. We see a lot of African immigrant women who come through our clinic. Some of them are residents and moved to the US legally or illegally. It truly doesn't matter to us. Some of them are temporary here. And I witnessed one woman who referenced that she had it done to her one time, but one particular story broke my heart. It was a young woman. She was in the United States with a 3-year-old child and just delivered her second child. And she actually described to me that she and her husband fled her country of birth. And I don't want to mention which country right now, but she said that his mother, the mother of her husband, kept insisting on her having that procedure. She never had it done, but the pressure on her spouse was so high that she and her husband made the conscious decision. They came to us as visitors just for tourist visa. They were in our clinic after deliver her child. She was pregnant. And then they were planning to relocate to Canada later on to some friends and family. They did relocate to Canada, and I received a word of thanks from her. But it was my first experience ever to talking to somebody in a situation where the whole life trajectory, she said that if it wouldn't be for that fear of her eventually winning that pressure on her son and her husband, they would have never considered moving out. They had a big family on her side and they loved where they were living. But she said she got education in France over a couple of years. She was aware of this as a major problem. And she just feared that at some point her husband, who loved her and was very supportive of her, will not be able to stand up to protect her. She also said that in her family in particular, her mother-in-law insisted that she gets cared OBGYN chosen by her and not the young woman herself. And she was just afraid to go for this OBGYN care because she feared that at some point she might just come for regular checkup, being put to sleep and the procedure being performed against her will. And again, really witnessing somebody sitting with a young infant and fleeing the country, fleeing her home for the fear of that procedure being performed put me at the question, do we do enough as a pediatrician? So I don't know if you want to comment on that, because we are not primary caretakers for the women, but I think we are the hub where they come and trust us so much in regards of the child care. How to, obviously we're using your tool, but do you want to share some insights of coming across the specialties of the physicians who are not, primary interacting with women and building that bridge of trust so this topic comes in? And should we as pediatric care providers be more attentive to this topic? And I don't know if you would have any words of wisdom. Should we preferentially address women of African origins? Is so predominant, but based on your topic, it's equally predominant here, which makes me think, should we, as we screen for domestic violence, should there be some kind of screening there for women overall? And just final comment, and I'll let you please comment. I know we don't have much time. In DC in particular, so it sounds like you've done really amazing advocacy regionally. And I wanted to ask you, have you ever had a conversation with the Department of Health? And the reason I'm asking you that is that we are all undergoing obligatory yearly training for licensing. For example, in DC area, we do 3 hours of training on the HIV, particularly on the height of epidemic. Most recently, last couple of years, in order for the physicians, providers, nurse practitioner, every prescribing physician, in order for us to get renewal of our license, we had to take LGBTQI training, as this agenda is being promoted. And just a question, as I ask you about other subspecialties that are not directly maybe that closely involved with women, have you considered, or would it be something that would help, or our voice could help you to promote with the Department of Health? So let me stop here and hear you and Angela and Khadija elaborate on my points about pediatricians.
Yes, everything you just said. We would love to have mandatory training. I think the way you prefaced it in terms of domestic violence, that's the world I also come from. Universal screening has done a lot so that you're not making those judgment calls.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I screen all my patients. And so we can definitely work with you on how to triage to ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that you described, we have heard. So definitely the fear, be able to protect your family, to protect yourself. These are all stories that we also have heard. And so training pediatricians, yes, because we also know that infant care is one that people will engage in. There's a great level of trust that's instilled in the pediatrician. And with that trust comes also responsibility on the part of the pediatrician to act in the best interests of the entire family. And so having that trust set up by virtue of working with the child, you also have that trust with then the mother. Mm-hmm. And that's a great way to also, I know we ask a lot of pediatricians, right? But you have that relationship that not other healthcare providers have with that unit. And so if there's anything that we can do, we would love to help in any way, provide training, provide screening, working with the Department of Health, working with you in partnership. The second to last slide was next steps. And that first point is one that we want to invite everyone on this screen, everyone that is listening to this. We have set up what we call an integrated community of care. And that is having those parties that are involved in working with women and children and families, whether it's pediatricians, healthcare providers, mental health providers, law enforcement, education, CBOs. We're bringing people together in small groups so that they can create not only awareness, but also work together to provide those safety nets, because we can't do it all ourselves. Like advocates can't work alone, pediatricians can't work alone, but by bringing people together, we can create that safety net that should you have questions, well, you know who to call. And that's part of what we call this integrated community of care. So we invite everyone who's on this screen, who is listening or watching this, to work with us. And you can email any one of us to get integrated into that. And I know that, Angela also provides one of the only support groups for survivors. And I don't know if you want to comment on some of the stories that Nutella had been talking about.
And there is one question in the chat while Angela answers, if you can look, Karen. Angela, please.
Right, the adverse childhood experience, it is not. And I actually have an article, hopefully coming out soon, about how FGMC is an ACE. It is not explicitly written about. And one of the issues is that because of the silence and the taboo and the cultural / religious implications, people don't talk about it as a form of abuse.
And you mentioned trust. Trust is so key in our support group. And over the years, I have realized that the women, you have to gain their trust in order for them to open up and share their stories and talk about the pain that they're feeling. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's physical pain, but it's psychological pain that they are experiencing. And that's why the support group is so important to them. And we give them that service. And what the example you talked about, Natalia, about the woman and her husband who fled their country. There are several women in our support group that have similar stories, because the pressure is so much on them from family members to have it done to their little girls. Or in that case, in that lady's case, she had not undergone it, but her in-laws wanted her to undergo it. We have experiences like that. Or women have lost their husbands, their marriages, because the husbands cannot deal with what they had gone through when they were children.
You mentioned the child, and I forgot to mention that 3-year-old child that this woman had was a girl. And in addition to having fear for herself, which was imminent, she eventually knew that the issue would rise equally for her daughter. And it was another big driving force, because she didn't think that it would be enough just for her to fulfill that. And obviously she was grown up woman, she already knew what sex was. So she also knew that for her, it would be robbing her of the experiences she already had. And so, but I did forget to mention that her 3-year-old child, the boy, the second child, we were testing and everything, and it was a positive. The woman who lived with HIV, so she had the boy, so that was not a real issue for him. But her 3-year-old daughter was definitely.
Yes, and Karen knows that we had a case a few years ago where locally a 12-year-old girl, her mother was trying to take her back to Liberia to have FGM done to her. And we had to work with we had to get the FBI involved and work to keep the girl here in the US and not have her return to West Africa, because, and today that girl is now in high school, and she has not gone back to West Africa for it to be done to her. And I'm so happy, because she will be the first female in her entire family from generations before to not have FGM done to her.
And that's why pediatricians are so important. Angela showed you the chart at the age of cut. The average is 6 to 7 of when it happens. So if pediatricians have a direct role to provide in terms of primary prevention. The other point I want to make is you're going to notice that we did not use a certain term to describe FGMC, and that term is circumcision. Because what some people will try to do is to say it's female genital circumcision, and to say that it's no different than male circumcision. And that's not true. If we were to equate male circumcision to what's happening to female circumcision, we don't lop off boys' penises, right? So they're not the same. So we purposely do not use those terms so that we do not make that it's a similar case.
I think this terminology distinction is crucial even for pediatricians to know as well, because I have heard the terminology of female circumcision, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that what I know of it, it's by far not the same. Level of pain experienced and consequence for health is absolutely non-comparable. And also the one woman that I also put in the chat who was not in this acute scenario, but she just was a woman with, I think, third child, and she had each delivery was just extremely traumatic because of this. She had already some repairs done, but basically that third delivery was C-section because there was no way for her delivery, but first and second deliveries were done overseas. And they were extremely traumatic. She mentioned that because we obviously in HIV world, our criteria for C-section are based on HIV control. And again, I'm talking primarily about women with HIV infection, many of whom come from Africa. And that particular woman absolutely had no indications for C-section from the point of view of HIV disease. It was extremely well controlled. Her main indication for C-section in the US was FMG history and prior to extremely traumatic delivery with tremendous amount of scarring and things like that. So her OBGYN here didn't even put vaginal delivery as an option for her health needs. So I haven't seen, and obviously it was a different story. She was staying here, etc. But somebody just saying that was the reason of my C-section, and she missed the experience of vaginal birth, but she also told me she didn't miss the experience of the traumatic birth that she had before.
There's something else I want to add. I know earlier Dr. McDonnell was talking about families. And so another aspect of the toolkit is you also talk to men, like, you know, maybe the husbands or the fathers or the uncles, and they have a role to play as well in ending FGM/C. So like when you're working with, you know, patients that come in, whether it's mother and children, think of the fathers as well, because they can also play an important role. And we actually have captured voices from men who have shared their perspectives and have known maybe a female relative that's undergoing FGM or a sister, for example. And we have a partner, Maria, who she has a or called Sahio, and she has an aspect called Bahio, which is voices of men. And we also created a nice video of men just talking about it, and also incorporated faith leaders, because as we mentioned, one of the justifications is religion. So these faith leaders kind of debunked the fact that people think it is religious, but it's not, and it kind of provided evidence, and they brought out different parts of their different religious texts to kind of, you know, provide evidence as well. So these are also things you can find on the toolkit that was shared earlier in the comments, and also here in the presentation. But we can definitely also talk to fathers as well if you think that's a need, you know, for our patients.
Well, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much, Khadija, for joining us, enlightening us on this very important topic, making sure we understand that it is not just a global health issue, but it is closely linked to domestic health as well. And I think even listening to just a word of gratitude on behalf of many women whom you already helped in research, and keeping this research topic ongoing. I'm actually thinking at the end of our talk, since I'm leading the Global Health Week, we could consider doing a grant application. So Karen, wait here for me, just surveying maybe our teenage girls who particularly are in care and on multiple entry points at children's, about their knowledge about that, and whether they understand what it means and have ever they heard about that. And maybe even if they didn't hear, maybe within their community, they have heard a conversation. So I wonder if we could particularly target the populations we serve, and maybe through some kind of starting by just mapping out the knowledge among the teenagers in the US on this topic, and in our area, which also is a very big hub of African immigration in DC. I know we're one of the big national hubs. So definitely prompts us to more thinking beyond just level of advocacy and clinical care, but you made us really think about where and how we can take this further. And just on behalf of myself and children's team, very big thank you. And I see that Annie, on behalf of everybody of our team, also is commenting that it's such a sensitive and important topic, and big gratitude for all your dedication. We saw today's three very passionate women who really made this just a mission. It's not, it doesn't sound like it's a project. It doesn't sound like it's a job. It just sounds like a mission you took on to serve this woman. So thank you very much. Thank you for those who attended, and for those who will be watching us online. There's contact information for everyone listed in the invitation as well. And if you want to continue the dialogue internally, children, feel free to reach to myself, and we will regroup together and think how we can move this cause forward. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Khadija. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.